Hi, and welcome to our very first LinkedIn conversation where I interview some of my friends, colleagues, and people that I admire here in the professional world. And today I am lucky enough to talk to my very favorite person, Emma Clust, and we're going to be talking today a little bit more about the intersection of corporate communication and cybersecurity. But Emma, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and what you do.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm honored to be the first. So thank you very much. Setting the bar nice and low for all future guests that you bring on. My name is Emma Clust, and I'm the Director of Strategic Accounts for Tanium. And my role at Tanium is really focused on helping my customers achieve better cybersecurity outcomes and gain better visibility into their IT estate. So there are a number of ways that we go about doing that, but that's kind of my work focus, and my territory, as it were, is the state of Indiana. So there's a whole lot of business in the state of Indiana, and I have really enjoyed that. Outside of that, I have two young kids, and am also the president of a local organization, so a nonprofit. So I just have so much free time.
Don't we all? I feel like any mom out there that's working and also volunteering, I admire you so much. I don't have children, so I admire all the moms out there that are also working and contributing to our community. So thank you for that.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's just dive right in. I'm curious, how would you describe the relationship between corporate and internal communication and cybersecurity in today's organization?
Yeah, I think, and there are a lot of factors, right? So there's been the proliferation of devices. It's not like it used to be when everyone had on their desk, and well, first of all, when everyone was sitting in a physical office and they had a desk phone and maybe a computer. And so corporate communication, it was an insular thing, and it was sort of whoever, the trickle down effect. There was the C-suite that would communicate, and then everyone else that would just receive the information. And it was sort of a one-way channel. And now everyone has multiple devices, multiple ways to consume information, multiple ways to then repost that same information. And so it's incumbent upon the C-suite and the leadership of companies to be very mindful of how they're communicating, with the assumption that any corporate communication may someday be read by a threat actor. So it's not enough just to know that the messaging that you're sending to your staff is on brand. There are also security considerations to what you send to your staff.
Yeah, and I guess in regards to cybersecurity, because I know that's what you guys specialize in, can you kind of just discuss how cybersecurity has evolved? I know you mentioned that kind of evolution of internal communications, especially in regards to security. So how has cybersecurity evolved, as I know internal communications has too?
Yeah, I think it's been forced to keep up. And as every new, opportunity and type of communication device has evolved, there then is a new threat surface to secure. And so it's almost impossible to keep up, which, most organizations and companies now seem to believe that a breach is inevitable. It's not a matter of if, it's when. And so evolving with that and trying to stay current on what new critical vulnerabilities are, what the new attack vector of the day looks like. It's every day, it's 24 hours a day. So the people that run the security operations for all organizations have an exhausting job.
Yeah. Well, and in your experience, how does that affect the internal communication, especially as it contributes to that robust security measures that you guys have, or our customers should have?
Yeah, they hopefully do have. I think that historically it's been that the IT and security departments are the departments of no, and that, the old culture was, don't ask them, they're just going to deny and you can't have it, or, whatever software you want to install or whatever product you're interested in, they're always going to just say no. And that created a lot of communications barriers. And so they really have had to be successful, you have to have a paradigm shift and a culture shift to make sure every person in an organization knows that they play a critical part in maintaining security, and it's really everyone's job. And so that information has to come from the top down, but not in a heavy-handed way, in an open and transparent way.
Yeah. Well, and even as I like reflect on my individual career and the different types of industries that I've been in, and from small, medium to larger companies, it really does. Like, it starts really at the top down, even though, like you mentioned, where we kind of get the pushback of like, oh, well, if you go talk to IT, they're going to give you that the answer is no. So that's interesting to hear you say that, because, reflecting on my own experience, I feel like I had a very similar situation happen. So that's very interesting.
And I think organizations that I see handling this successfully and having less silos are giving the why behind things, as opposed to just, and this sort of parallels to being a parent. Just saying no isn't really enough, because you really need to, just as a human being, you want to understand why. And so if the explanation is provided, typically that just helps everyone feel better, as opposed to just getting a one-word answer and leave that conversation feeling unsatisfied and frustrated and just reinforcing like, I'm never going back there. So it helps when the importance of security, and sometimes showing examples of other organizations and, unfortunate situations that have happened, can help motivate people to do a better job.
Yeah. Well, and kind of in that same vein, what are some examples of how poor internal communications and even practices have impacted their ability to respond and mitigate to cyber threats?
Yeah. Poor cyber hygiene, or just trusting that people are going to do the right thing or understand the risks of, clicking and opening that email attachment they weren't expecting, or not maintaining, multi-factor authentication, or, a good antivirus. All of those things seem super fundamental, but if they're not communicated consistently, clearly, and frequently to the entire organization, it just won't work and it'll lead to failure. But I've definitely seen organizations where the senior leadership doesn't value security and doesn't see cybersecurity as being critical to their business continuity. And so all of the costs related to buying products and securing their environment seem crazy to them, because they feel like, well, that department doesn't drive revenue, so they're an afterthought. Whereas really, without securing the environment and keeping the lights on and the machines running, or whatever it is that they produce, it just can't happen. So it's critical to business continuity. So those relationships and that perspective shift is really important. And instead of having the eye roll, like, oh, great, what's the flavor of the day that the IT department is going to ask me for today? It's understanding what the business risks are to not making the change.
Right. Exactly. Well, and in a lot of our customers, so with Yorko, a lot of our customers are like manufacturing, construction, landscaping, even healthcare, where a lot of the employees that work with these organizations aren't even in the office. So they don't have the ability to, either talk to the CEO or the main leadership, like they're not even there. So even though it sounds kind of silly to say like, oh, I might not click that link in the email, but if they're not there hearing those communications from their, suite mate or whatever, next thing you know, they forget, and they do tap that link because they're in the hurry. They're out in the field. They're out on the shop floor. I know, like here recently, I opened up an email and I was like, wait, is that actually from my boss? Like, it says that his name, like, in accordance to the email. And if I was out in the field busy, who would know? So that's critical.
That's such a good point. that cybersecurity and organizations in general have had to figure out with COVID and before. You're supporting, Heidi, you're supporting customers that are mostly remote workforce based. And so all of these organizations have had to reconsider how they approach cybersecurity and communication at large, because everyone's not sitting in a desk that can be spoken to, or you can't just go grab a conference room and handle it. You have to figure out how to manage a remote workforce. And so for Tanium, that's been very top of mind in the last few years to help our customers manage that remote. They're not coming in and connecting to the VPN, so how are they going to patch their laptop? All of those things are critical. They're not sexy and exciting, but if you don't do them, you're kind of stuck.
Right. So I guess kind of also just better understanding what Tanium does. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So Tanium was developed to allow organizations of all sizes to see every asset connected to their network. Previously, and even still, often I get into conversations where I'll ask someone, about how many devices do you have? So laptops, servers, virtual machines, containers. And, they look up and they kind of are averaging out and then they give me a number, about 5,000. And it's scary. I mean, that they don't know with confidence exactly how many they have and what the makeup of each one of those is, when the last time it was online, who used it last. So Tanium was developed to answer those questions. And then once you can answer those questions, you can control the devices via our Tanium agent and patch them. You can, threat hunt, look for lateral movement, manage certificates. The list goes on of what our capabilities are, but they're all predicated on that visibility piece.
Yeah, and I recently saw a post that you made on LinkedIn that you guys recently got an award of some kind. What was that?
We were award winners for a cloud. I'll have to go back and look and see. We've won a number of them this year, but a cloud security award winner for 2023 for top vulnerability management. So
yeah,
very exciting.
Yeah, that's extremely exciting, especially in regards to cybersecurity and how it relates to our internal employees. I mean, it's critical as far as how those types of threats are mitigated. So I'm curious as we move into more of like the challenges and barriers that our internal teams face on a day-to-day basis. So what are some of those common obstacles or barriers that organizations might encounter when they're looking at internal communication or even cybersecurity?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the internal communication piece because I'm sure you have experienced this, and I know that I definitely have, just over the course of our careers using technology, having a situation where your laptop goes down or restarts, or you're just about to, get into the greatest part of the Zoom meeting and Zoom needs to update and you didn't get asked and it's just shut down. Those obstacles are material to anyone's success and to just your employee experience. Right. And so for Tanium, we, seek to make that a better experience and do things in an automated way while not hindering the employee experience and remaining secure. So, but the other major issues that I feel organizations or I've experienced and witnessed have to do with just the number of tools and the number of vendor relationships that organizations have developed over time. And so there just wasn't an easy way to consolidate in the past because you needed a tool to do A, B, C, and D, and they didn't talk to each other. They weren't developed together. And so then that's, 5 contracts you're managing, 5 platforms you expect your staff to be adept in, and getting that reduced without sacrificing security is very challenging, but important and doable. And now with the economy, it's even more important. And that's what we're hearing more than ever is do more with less, and get better and healthier with less, which most of the time people's initial reaction is it can't be done.
Right.
It's very challenging, but obviously shameless plug, Tanium can help you do it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and speaking of tools, I know, especially right now with the AI emergence of the popularity and the hype, Every single time I log into my computer, I'm seeing another type of AI tool that's coming out. And I feel like that challenge, that obstacle that we're facing is only going to get even more complicated as we continue to see AI, you know, come into our corporate organizations. It hasn't come into ours quite yet, but I'm sure it's going to start to come into others. And so, like you said, it's just about how do we do that, and how do we find the right partners that can help us do that. So it sounds like Tanium's already on board to help get our organizations lean and mean. I love
Yeah,
it.
we certainly are trying our best. And I mean, the AI issue is definitely something that I've heard some of my customers talk about, not as it relates to cybersecurity, but I mean but also as it relates to intellectual property. So it was an interesting conversation, cautioning their staff not to ever put, specs of products that they're developing into ChatGPT to help ChatGPT write something for them, because it's there forever. And so there are
Yeah,
all of these other trickle down risks associated with leveraging those automations that probably aren't top of mind. And then once you've
yeah.
given the data, it's there forever.
Right, right. And again, with like that's still considered a cyber threat.
Yes.
And I don't think a lot of people even know that. I know there was recently a statistic that was released. I think it's like 14 to 18% of the US population is actually utilizing some form of like Chat GPT or an AI platform to help their day-to-day tasks. So it's not really big yet into our everyday use, but it's coming. And
Yeah.
like you said, it's a matter of knowing what to do and what not to do, and having partners like Tanium and Yorko here to help them make the right decision. So that's great. Kind of going in the same vein, I know we talked a little bit about some of the challenges and obstacles that our partners are currently facing, but I'm kind of curious, like what do we do? I mean, you mentioned we got to get leaner, but how else can we be mitigating some of those challenges and barriers, especially with internal communications or even cyber threats?
Yeah. I think there have to always be constant conversations and tabletop exercises to figure out how much risk is any organization willing to tolerate, and then how to achieve that risk level. But it can't be independent and isolated from the rest of the organization. So you've got to get the buy-in and create that culture of openness and collaboration across all of the teams, and understand that everyone is responsible for maintaining security. So even the person sitting at the front desk, whose role seems pretty far removed, could potentially inadvertently allow some threat actor to get in. And so, not to live in a state of paranoia, but just taking the right actions to maintain a reasonable amount of security. And we've definitely seen how many, just the proliferation of breaches. And you can see, just Google different organizations that have been breached and how they've responded to breaches, and try to determine what your organization would do in the event of an eventual breach, how you're going to communicate that to your staff. I mean, what if your systems are down and you're unable to get a communication out? How long do you wait to make that news public? What regulations and regulations are you subject to, and what kind of notifications are you required to make? Is it to the government? Do you have, a governing body of some kind that you have to report those issues to? So there are all of these things to consider that can be overwhelming, but they can't be done in a vacuum. So it has to be a collaborative process. And I think there has to be some level of transparency with the whole company of here's the plan, to the extent that everyone needs to know about it. And here's how you as an individual can contribute to us being successful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and even with organizations that are part of our clientele, we hear every single day about different types of, urgent style communication. And literally just a couple weeks ago, we got an email sent over to our engineering team and said, what if this, what if that, what if these things happen, similar to what you were just describing. And the great thing about utilizing a platform like Yorko is that you do have the ability to send out those mass communications to say, hey, this is what's going on. This is what's happened. We have been breached, or we're taking the necessary steps, or these are the types of expectations we have for you.
Yes.
And then luckily those types of internal communications have been made. And then the next steps can be taken to, whether it's to mitigate or from a PR standpoint, move forward in a successful way. So I love that. I guess from a leadership standpoint,
Can
though,
I ask you
go
a
ahead.
question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So as you are providing that guidance to your customer base, does Yorko provide kind of a best practices of like cadence of communication in the event of something unfortunate, whether it be a cybersecurity incident or a physical security incident or something else? How do you, or how would you as their trusted advisor guide them in that process?
Yeah. So a lot of our clients, mainly because they work in a physical place. So like as an example, over 80% of their employees will be out in the field of some kind. So they're physically working in a location, like maybe it's a construction site or a manufacturing facility. So they're not necessarily behind a computer in an office or at their home, but they're physically working somewhere. So most of the urgent communications that we see or that we talk about are mainly revolved around like weather, site conditions, heaven forbid, gun or human threats in regards to that type of safety. And then of course we have seen a few things in regards to cyber safety, what that looks like. And actually that's been more around the lines of like ransomware. And if something happens internally to their systems, they utilize Yorko to then communicate, because it's a secure way to communicate via text internally. So basically from a cadence perspective, what we advise them to do is set that strategy up front with their employees to say, here's what this will look like if these things happen, whether that's in their handbook or, in some form of a documentation standpoint. And then that way, right away, the employees know if something happens, this is what the protocol will look like. So then if it does, and they receive a mass communication via text, which is what Yorko does, they won't be surprised. They won't be surprised to see their manager or the HR director or IT director sending out a form of communication that might look alarming, but knowing upfront what that strategy looks like. And I think that kind of goes into having good leadership and having that, like you said before, kind of tying it all the way back to the beginning, having that top-down internal communication structure already in place, especially in regards to cybersecurity and other threats, whether it be physical or weather. Yeah, I think it's
you
really
don't want
important.
to leave it up to the time of incident to figure out how to manage it.
Yep. And sometimes I think too, from a risk management standpoint, I know a lot of the clients that we work with have someone in place, whether it's a safety manager or like a risk manager. They kind of have that person in the organization aligning with their type of industry. So like in manufacturing or construction, there's so many other risks that come involved with having that type of business.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important having a specialist internally, not just having a vendor, but also having a person internally too.
Oh, I completely agree. But I think, to kind of add on to what you were saying, having that person be visible to everyone in the organization and having people understand what their role is and why it's important makes people buy into the idea of doing those things, whatever the best practices are, as opposed to it just being another person whose job I don't really understand and another barrier to me, finishing the job that I'm getting paid to do. People forget and things just become habitual. And so, some workplaces, when they have the OSHA signs or like number of days since the last incident, and those things are important, but having consistent programs in place to reinforce why they're important, using different examples or different content to keep it interesting. Otherwise, people just get lazy, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and even to kind of still on the same vein, as far as really dialing into that communication or kind of culture, we were just talking about this last night at a networking event I was at. If you have to put your culture down into like a handbook of some kind, then the culture isn't in action. And so culture really does, it's a form of action. So if your leadership isn't already acting on the culture that they want, then it's not really going to happen. And so, like you said before, really, in my opinion, and I think a lot of other successful organizations would agree, that it starts at the top and then it's got to have effective in-action engagement from leadership. So that way the employees are doing the same things and doing what's expected.
It's not enough to say it. You have to do it, and everyone needs to be bought in, because otherwise it's just words on a page and everyone ignores it.
Yep, exactly. Well, I know we're kind of coming up to our time frame here. So I wanted to ask you just a couple last questions. One of them will be kind of fun, and then the last one will just be mainly about our conversation today. So first, I just want to ask you to provide those that listened into our interview today, what would you say are some key takeaways that you want them to gain from our conversation today?
Yeah, I think that being prepared and sitting down before an incident occurs and figuring out how to manage those incidents. And obviously, no one is going to be able to predict and plan for every possible scenario, but having a framework that everyone is aware of and is comfortable with will make any response feel more comfortable to your entire company. And it's important not to just send, one message. That I've definitely have partners that I've worked with who have had incidents or breaches or ransomware attacks, and they've gotten, one communication and then radio silence for a really long time. And even if there's nothing new to report, people want to be informed, and no one wants to just be sitting out there worrying about what the possibilities are. So coming up with those plans so people know what to expect is really important. And then just the reinforcement and best practices of, basic fundamental hygiene in terms of your IT environment is critical to an organization staying healthy.
I love it. Well, I really appreciate our conversation today, and just the overall questions that you asked me and the time that you gave me. But I wanted to end it on one fun, kind of non-work related question. So I always love to ask people, who is the one person that you admire in the professional world that you'd like to share with us and give us a little bit of why?
Oh boy, there are a lot of really, really influential people that I try to keep up with for personal and professional reasons. But locally, over the last year, a year and a half probably, since I've been really focused on Tanium and cybersecurity, someone who has just resonated with me has been Linda Calvin. She is always outspoken and direct and says what she means, but is very thoughtful. And so I love to just keep up with her and see what she's working on and make sure that I am, staying abreast with all the most important information. And it's not necessarily related to IT. It's just related to being a good citizen of the world and making sure that I'm doing my part, however small. So I really deeply respect her.
That's awesome. Well, I really respect you, Emma, for your time today. And I appreciate allowing me the space to interview you, and we'll stay connected.
I'm very
so
flattered. Thank you.
Thanks for hopping on with me today.
Thank you for having me. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.